all, welcome to day 43 of my Dating Myself challenge. Day 43 of 90 of dating myself after following 90 days of a challenge to reduce binge eating behaviors, which was successful. Now, before I get into my dating myself activity for later today, a lot of you that have been joining me and connecting with me have been asking questions about the binge eating. So I want to kind of go back to the basics and share the tool I created to help me reduce giving in to binge eating urges, because what I'm doing right now with dating myself is similar. I'm not sure if any of you have been in the same position, but after separating from my husband, I was doing some work on myself and realized that I have a habit of going from relationship to relationship, or relationship to crush to relationship. Like, I'm never single for very long, always attached to somebody regardless of the intensity of the attachment. So part of this challenge is doing the work needed on myself to kind of look at, why is this so? What kinds of unconscious needs am I relying on other people for that I'm not giving to myself? Because filling unconscious and subconscious needs, or really filling subconscious needs, right? And becoming aware of that and bringing those subconscious needs to the purpose, to the conscience, that's a big part of recovery from addictive habits. And even though I'm not addicted to love in the same way that I was addicted to the habit of binge eating, there are overlaps, right? Particularly in moments when I'm feeling intense desire for somebody that I love, crush on, have feelings for, etc. So, and this is an interesting time to be doing this experiment, because right now there is somebody I have those feelings for, so I'm kind of practicing it, practicing this same tool to deal with love urges. And when I say love urges, I don't necessarily literally mean love, right? I mean anything that kind of falls under the umbrella of romantic desires, right? As benign or as intense as they could be, all along that spectrum. That's really, what I'm referring to. It's just love urges is kind of a brief, catchy umbrella term to put it under. So for purposes of this conversation, that's how I am referring to it. So I think many, if not all of us, can probably relate to, we all know what it's like to have a crush on somebody, to develop feelings for somebody, whether it's just something flirty and fun, or, starting to build the blocks for something that could lead to love. We know what it's like to have kind of a preoccupation with a person, right? A desire to be with them a lot, talk to them a lot, but at the same time, need to stick to some boundaries ourselves and also give them their space and not smother them. So that's kind of the line that that's the line that I am towing right now, right? And I have had some urges to follow, that almost feel like the intensity of a binge urge, oh my gosh, I just want to text them, but it's not always a good idea to OD on love, right? Or go way into contacting these people all the time for various reasons. It's usually not a good idea at all. So I want to share today how I used the CDAT model, the Catch, Defend, Act, Trust, that helps me reduce binge urges with what I'm going through right now. So putting my experience aside, I'm going to generalize this a little bit because it could be applicable towards a lot of situations, right? So I'm going to generalize it a little bit, but here it is. I'm going to put this up to the camera so you can see and kind of go through each circle and say how they can be beneficial with dealing with urges related to interacting with a crush, or even somebody who you're already dating or already in a relationship, because you need to enact boundaries and be aware of your own needs in that space anyway. So So let's say that, let's say that you're dating somebody, right? And, you're texting back and forth, and they're in the middle of really busy days. They've got a lot going on, but you still feel this like, oh my gosh, I want to talk to them so bad. Right? So if you can relate, and if this is something that you want to work on, pay attention to this a little bit. So the first step is to catch, right? Notice the urges as they arrive from a certain part of your brain. That like impulsive part of your brain that just wants dopamine rush after dopamine rush, is saying, I want. Like a little kid, right? Like a little kid wanting candy or like hugs from their mom. I want. So notice that, right? That's the first step, to notice, part of my brain is really, really wanting to do X action, right? Great job. You noticed it. So the second part is to defend against that part of your brain, right? Because there's a couple of different parts of your brain. Sorry, my arm got tired, then I'll go back to the chart. But there's a couple of different parts of your brain, right? For those of you who have read any of Don Miguel Ruiz before, particularly the 4 agreements, you'll be familiar with this comparison. But for the rest of you, basically, he makes a reference to like a warrior part of your brain, right? That's basically, like in scientific terms, our prefrontal cortex, right? The part of our brains that control insight and judgment. And that part of your brain, if you're somebody who is prone to impulsivity, right? Whether it be addictions, like any kind of like impulsive or compulsive behavior, or if you've been through trauma in the past, particularly early in your life, and you have, attachment issues that come up in relationships, your prefrontal cortex or your warrior brain is probably going to have to kind of mitigate a lot of like the urges and desires that come from like the limbic part of your brain, the back of your brain. Some people call it the lizard brain, right? That's the first part of your brain to develop that controls primal urges, right? So when I say defend as the next step after catch, that basically means after you see the urge come up, then what needs to happen is you need to tune into your prefrontal cortex, your warrior, and start defending that part of your brain, because this lizard part of your brain, which in the 4 agreements, Don Miguel Ruiz called the parasite, like their job is basically to try to eat away at the warrior, right? Similar to how that limbic part of our brain can sometimes, the impulse can feel so powerful that it can basically overwhelm our prefrontal cortex, right? So the defend is basically doing anything you can to channel your warrior or your prefrontal cortex to remind your lizard brain, your parasite, that like this situation is not as dire as you think. And in situations like this, it could be, with the dating texting example, to remind yourself, have the warrior step in, and remind the rest of your brain, okay, just because you don't hear from somebody by text for a few days doesn't mean that they're not interested in you, right? Everybody has different styles of communication, different priorities. So many of us are balancing self-care with care for others, that we really need to be mindful of that and realistic of our expectations, right? And usually, that part, I know it's certainly, that true with me, that part of you that like worries when you're not hearing somebody, or worries when you're not hearing from somebody, or is like, are they mad at me? Did I do this? I guarantee you, with most people, the root of that is in some kind of trauma you experienced earlier, where you felt neglected or abandoned or disappointment by somebody. And if that trauma is unresolved, if that little child that's living in the limbic part of your brain never got reassurance that whatever happened to you traumatic when you were younger wasn't your fault, that perhaps there were adults or others in your lives that made mistakes because they're human too, and that impacted you, like it's not your fault, right? So the defend stage, I'm going to hold this up to this again. The defend stage is really when your warrior you really got to channel your warrior and your prefrontal cortex and being like, okay, is this, you have to step back and almost look at it from an outsider, right? Like look at your behavior from an outsider and be like, is this logical, realistic, and based on the situation? And 9 times out of 10, the worry is due to something unrelated to the actual situation, but something in your past, right? And when you go into the defend stage, right, you can recognize that and label it, right? This is my parasite, this is my lizard brain, this is my trauma, right? So that's what happens in the defend stage. You channel your warrior, you step in, you defend your warrior's perspective, and you basically, kind of tell the parasite, I know what this is, and it's not consistent with the reality. Okay? So that's catch and defend. Catch the urge, defend your warrior, act, right? This one's so important, the A for act. So basically what this means is, if you know for a fact, as I do, that when these thoughts come up, they're because of past traumas and they're not consistent with the reality of the situation, basically you have to act in a way that's the opposite of the way the traumatized you would act. So for me, that's acting in a way in the opposite of getting, for me, in that situation, if, the texting example, applied to me, that would mean, say, I then would not be obsessively texting somebody, right? Or not just me, anyone really. It means to not act out in the frantic way that that parasite part of your brain is wanting you to act, because it's not appropriate for the situation, and it probably would be overbearing to the other person too as well, right? So this act is crucial, and a lot of times this action is inaction. A lot of times this act step is the absence of something else you would do. Like with the binge eating, the act part was just not binging. Whatever I did, it wasn't binging. Even if it was literally doing nothing and not binging. Act is the manifestation of the behavior that's different that you used to behave before when you were acting based on your trauma, right? So that's the act part. It's the simplest part, but the hardest part, if that makes sense, right? Simplest thing to do is act differently. Also, very, very, very hard. And it took me a long time to get here, but I did, and in most situations with both of my challenges, I've been acting differently. And then the last part is trust, right? The last part is trust that if you act differently, things will be okay. When you learn to act on habits and patterns differently, your brain is changing, right? You're changing the way your brain responds to things by doing things differently. The brain gets rewired by action. And at the beginning, that can feel like a really terrifying and sometimes isolating process. But in so many situations, that difficulty fades. It may not even ever fade 100%. I may always have a little bit of insecurity and activity in my brain, acting out, in terms of relationships and dating and sex and all of that. There may always be a little bit there, but what I'm learning from this process is I can see it, and I don't need to let it control my actions or beliefs or self-esteem or rule my life. I can see it and be like, I know this thought, I know where this is coming from, I can see it, I can channel my warrior, I can recognize what it would look like to act differently, and I'm beginning to trust that if I do that, things will be okay. So just a quick reminder, catch, defend, act, trust, a process that you can probably use for many kinds of behavioral urges and addictions in terms of addressing the urges in your moment and training your brain to do a different thing. So my self-dating activity for today. Well, this was kind of it because this was really therapeutic to put together. But I am either going to do a nature walk if it's not too hot because it's brutal here today. I'm either going to do a little nature walk with my friend this evening, or I am going to have like a creative date myself. So I'm gonna have fun, give myself the gifts of either connecting to nature or connecting to my creativity. And I also have a Stranger Things date tonight with a friend to watch Stranger Things. So fun activities. You know, part of my dating challenge is, you know, connecting with myself in ways that fulfill the needs I have typically sought out in romantic partners in the past. So, and part of that for all of us is like, you know, shared fun behaviors. So that is what I'm going to do. Thanks for sticking in with me. I know this was a long one, but I hope it was super helpful. And I'll see you guys tomorrow for day 44, almost the halfway point. Thanks all.